Is my belief inflexible? Am I assuming that unless a particular choice is made or option chosen, everything will be ruined? Here is an example of how this questioning tactic might work. You are thinking of changing your job and have identified your problem with your present job as feeling depressed and worthless. You believe this is because your boss doesn't like you. You might ask yourself, is my belief illogical? Does my boss really dislike me? Is my sense of being disliked extreme? What firm evidence do I have? Am I being inflexible? Do I believe my boss has to like me all the time for me to feel valued and happy? The answers that you give may confirm your assumption or put it in a new light, opening up new options. Changing contexts and passing time. One important point to bear in mind is that the factors that influence your decisions may not stay the same forever. The picture is likely to alter with the passage of time, and problems can appear or disappear almost overnight because of changes in the background context. Staying alert to context changes. List the ways in which the context of your situation could change. Which elements of your life or environment, if removed or modified, would totally alter the problem? And what would the implications of such changes be? Which elements of your situation would become more or less significant as a result? Keep an eye on the horizon. What small elements that exist now have the potential to grow in size and influence in the future? Watch out especially for any elements that are subject to exponential growth in size or extent that accelerates at an increasingly rapid rate, building on itself in a snowballing effect, like the growth of algae over a pond. Unlike the regular course of linear growth, exponential growth can quickly alter the whole environment. Because many actions can take months, years, or even decades to show their full effects, the ultimate consequences of what we do or fail to do can be hard to predict or plan for. One major example of this is the threat of climate change. How are our activities today going to alter the world that we then leave to our grandchildren? Will this go on forever? Estimating how long a situation will last can often affect how you view that situation and any decisions you take regarding it. If you knew, for example, that there was a better than even chance that your unpleasant new neighbors would move away within 2 years, that could affect how you decide to handle an ongoing dispute with them. But is it feasible to predict how long things will last? An interesting perspective on this problem was devised by American physicist J. Richard Gott. In 1969, Gott visited the Berlin Wall, built in 1961, and wondered how long it would remain standing. As there was nothing special about the time he'd picked to visit it, he reasoned that if he could divide the wall's lifetime into 4 quarters, there was a 50% chance that he was somewhere in the middle 2 quarters. Based on this assumption, he reckoned that there was a 50% chance the wall would last from 1/3 to 3 times as long as it had already, more than 2 2/3 but less than 24 years. The wall was actually demolished 20 years later, in 1989. Gott also estimated that there was a 95% chance humanity would continue to exist for another 5,100 to 7.8 million years. The huge range results from his seeking such a high probability. The greater the certainty required, the wider the time span will need to be. Pick a time, anytime. The duration calculator. This calculation will give you a quick estimate of how long an object or situation might last, with a 60% chance of being correct. Better than evens, and without producing an unworkably broad time span. Take the time in weeks, months, or years that your object or situation has already been in existence. Multiply by 4 to give the longest time left. Divide by 4 to give the shortest time left. You can use the duration calculator based on Gott's formula to predict approximately how long an object or situation will last without needing to know anything other than your subject's age. For the calculation to work, there should be nothing special about the starting point. You can't, for example, use it to predict the length of a friend's marriage at the time of the wedding because you're at a predetermined point, the start. Neither is it realistic for things that have a well-established average duration, such as a human life. The calculation also works best on shorter time spans. With time that runs into decades or even longer periods, you can only produce impracticably broad estimates. Some further examples for which this method can be applied include: how much longer is your car likely to keep running? How long might the company you work for last? And, one for fun, how long will the current #1 book, film, single stay at the top? While not amazingly accurate, the technique can certainly provide a different view that could influence your decision-making. 4. Making your decision. Being decisive and being effective go hand in hand. Once you've generated as many options as you can, considered them, and examined all the different angles, you should have all the necessary information on which to base a decision. This chapter covers some powerful and precise techniques for helping you to assess different options. Making your decision also involves assessing risks. Everyone has a different attitude toward risks, and this chapter has exercises that help you to identify your own approach. There are also tips on eliminating common biases that can color your thinking, and on getting the best from other people's input. Weighing up choices. When you reach the stage in decision-making where you're confronted with more than one possible option, you need to make a choice. Following are several techniques that can help you to weigh up one option against another. Pros and cons. One of the founding fathers of America, Benjamin Franklin, invented perhaps the most famous method for making decisions. Simply list all the positive, pro, and negative, con, points for each option. Seeing them written down helps you to sort out their relative importance. You can go further, give each pro or con a score, and then add them up to give a total score for each option. Likelihood versus desirability. A more precise way that you can weigh up the relative attractiveness of your various options is to rate the possible outcome of each according to 2 factors: how likely it is and how desirable it is. 1. Give each option a mark out of 100 based on your estimate of the likelihood of a particular outcome. 0 would be almost impossible, 50 represents an equal chance of the event happening or not happening, and 100 is almost inevitable. 2. Then rate how desirable the outcome of an option is on a scale of -7 to +7. 0 is neutral. 3. Multiply these 2 figures together, likelihood times desirability, to give a figure for the attractiveness of that option. Attractiveness rating is most useful for comparing options for which the pros and cons are finely balanced. The outcomes might be desirable but not likely, or undesirable but likely. For example, suppose you need to find a speaker quickly for a charity dinner. Your options are Gloria Starlet, Marty Millionaire, Senator Wiseman. Sending out multiple requests could result in more than one acceptance, which would be embarrassing. It may help to first work out the attractiveness of the 3 choices based on the likelihood of their being available and their desirability. Decision trees. A decision tree is a diagrammatic method of showing what different courses of action could mean for you. Decision trees are a little like solution trees, but rather than drawing out possible solutions, they are a way for you to plot alternative outcomes. Plotting a decision tree. Each decision you take opens up further possibilities. By plotting the course of these choices in the form of a diagram with branches, you can instantly see the relationship between the decisions and the outcomes they might yield. As an example, imagine that you're the head of a company and you have the option of hiring a brilliant sales director who may or may not have committed fraud. A decision tree could outline some possible choices, courses, and outcomes. The tree's two main branches represent the two choices, to employ the sales director or not. The twigs growing from each branch show the main consequences of each choice. If you employ him, he may turn out to have been a fraudster or he may not. Even if he was a fraudster, there are two possible consequences. He will defraud you, or he won't. Two further twigs. If you decline to employ the sales director, then the consequences are either that nothing will change, i.e., you will go on as before, or that another rival company will employ him and pose even greater competition for your firm than before. Comparing possible outcomes. Each consequence can be given a likelihood and a desirability rating, as described earlier. Note, the likelihood ratings for each major branch of your tree should add up to 100. For instance, 50% chance he is a fraudster, 50% chance he isn't. For each possible outcome, multiply the likelihood number by the desirability number to give an overall rating. Finally, add up all the overall ratings for each of the two courses of action in order to compare one total score against another. Effort and reward. Another good way to explore a range of options and decide which goal to pursue is to look at the ease of each task versus the possible rewards from the outcomes. There is a useful method of weighing up one goal against another in this way, based on a military technique called the Carver matrix. Adapting the Carver matrix. The original Carver matrix was designed to help a military force assess which of a range of enemy targets would be the best to aim for. However, you can employ the technique for everyday purposes to help you choose which of several options might be the best one to pursue. Carver is an acronym for critically, how vital is it to pursue this goal? Accessibility, how easy is it to reach the goal? Recognizability, how easy will it be for you to obtain information on how to achieve your goal and to recognize when you are on target to achieve it? Vulnerability, is your target easy to hit? The less force or energy it would take to overcome this challenge, the greater its vulnerability. Effect, how much of an effect on your life overall would accomplishing this goal have? Recuperability, if you fail to reach the goal, how much of a setback would the lost time and energy represent? Using the matrix. Draw up a grid with a list of possible goals down the left-hand side and each point of the Carver matrix across the top. If one of the criteria is not relevant to any of your particular range of goals, you can leave it out. Then for each goal, consider each of the 6 Carver points and award them a score of -7 to +7. Pay special attention when rating vulnerability and recuperability. For each of these aspects, if they would require a lot of energy to achieve, you should give them a low rating, because any setback would involve a major loss of energy which is undesirable. But if they involve little energy, and therefore little cost if you should fail, then give them a high rating. Working along each row, add up the Carver points for each goal. Write the total at the end of the row. The highest score will be the best decision for you to pursue. Your decision-making style. As well as assessing practical factors such as likelihoods and benefits, you need to take account of your personal response to situations. Your outlook, and in particular your appetite for risk, can have a major bearing on your decisions. How do you handle risks? Imagine yourself in each of the following situations and think how you'd react. Situation 1. A friend gives you tips on 3 high-risk but high-yield shares. You make an excellent profit on the first, so you take that and invest it in the second, which also makes an excellent profit. Do you then, A, place all your profits on the third tip, B, quit while you're ahead and not risk the third tip, C, place half your profits on the third, because you could make more, but if you don't, you've still got some left. Situation 2. It's a fine, warm day, but the forecast warns of rain later. You're going to be walking a lot and will be carrying a briefcase and laptop, so an umbrella will be awkward and a raincoat will make you hot. Do you, A, leave the umbrella and coat behind so you have less to carry and hope that the fine weather continues? B, take your umbrella and raincoat, as it's better to be safe than sorry. C, just take the umbrella, because although it will be extra to carry, it will give you some protection if the heavens open. Situation 3. You run a popular sandwich shop. The owner of a local business has provisionally promised you an order to supply all of his employees with their daily lunches, provided that you could start quickly. However, to meet this demand, you would need to employ more staff. Yet if the order doesn't materialize, you could be left in debt. Do you, A, employ an extra person straight away so that you'll be in a position to take on the contract immediately if you get it? B, wait until you have a signed contract in place before employing anyone? C, hire a temporary employee so that you could at least make a start on fulfilling the contract, but without having to risk the expense of taking on a full-time employee. Situation 4. You need to sell your house quickly because you're moving to a new city, and paying to rent somewhere until you sell would cost you a lot of money. Someone makes you an immediate, unnegotiable offer, but it's less money than you wanted. Do you, A, reject the offer in the hope that a better one will come soon? B, accept the offer immediately? C, try to keep the buyer interested but stall for time in the hope that a better offer will appear? What your answers mean. If you gave more A answers than B or C's, then you're a gambler. If you gave more B answers than A or C's, then you're a banker. If you gave more C answers than A or B's, then you're an investor. Gambler. Gamblers tend to have an appetite for the highest gains and are willing to take the necessary risks to get them. They have an entrepreneurial attitude toward life and are always optimistic about their chances of success. Advice for gamblers. Check your facts beforehand. Don't be too optimistic. Take out good insurance to safeguard against large losses. Don't fall prey to the gambler's fallacy. Banker. Bankers take the opposite view and are usually highly averse to risk. Avoiding loss is their main concern. Bankers are good at keeping a level head in risky situations and at slow, steady growth over time. Advice for bankers. Don't be blind to opportunities. Don't be too slow in analyzing situations that require speedy responses. Remember the maxim that we are more likely to regret the things that we didn't do than those that we did. Investor. Investors take a middle-of-the-road position, attempting to compromise between risk and security. Essentially, investors want to minimize regret by avoiding the risk of big losses, while also trying to pursue opportunities. Investors are good in uncertain situations. Advice for investors. Because you adopt a strategy halfway between the other two types, read the advice given for both. Beware of sitting on the fence or getting paralyzed by indecision. To make the most of your own decision-making style, bear in mind its pros and cons. For certain situations, you may even find it helpful to consider an approach that's different from your normal style. Understanding risk. When trying to judge risk, we don't always think rationally. We have certain responses programmed into our brains by evolution, allowing us to make decisions without having to wait for all the facts. These rules served us well in prehistory, but can all too easily lead us astray in the modern world. Facts versus feelings. You should be able to assess any risk accurately, provided that you have sufficient information. Such assessment is what insurance companies do by gathering data relating to the likelihood of an event. However, every risk also has an emotional aspect. How risky you feel it to be. Emotional reactions form the basis of some misleading rules of thumb. We overestimate the risk of, or are irrationally afraid of, threats that 1. Are new and/or rare, 2. Other people cause, 3. Are beyond our control or are imposed on us, 4. Don't bring any benefits, 5. Are spectacular and/or dramatic. We underestimate the risk of, or are unduly complacent about, threats that 1. We are familiar with, or that we have been around a long time. 2. Have natural causes. 3. We can control or that we choose. 4. Bring benefits or rewards. 5. Seem mundane in character. Given that such common misconceptions bias our thinking, even when operating below the radar of conscious awareness, it's hardly so surprising that most of us have a skewed idea of actual risk. For example, although we are statistically far more likely to die of food poisoning or in a vehicle accident than in a plane crash or a terrorist attack, we'll usually be more afraid of these dramatic, though relatively improbable, events. Planes seldom crash, but these accidents rate as a high risk in our minds because they match numbers 3, 5, and sometimes 2 of the conditions under which we overestimate threats. Increasing objectivity. Simply by being aware of these misleading rules of thumb, we can more easily avoid being tricked by them. Whenever you're avoiding taking a risk, consider those conditions under which we may overestimate a threat listed earlier. If the reasons for your feelings of threat involve one or more of those items, then think through whether your decision is rational and makes sense. Alternatively, if you're going to be engaging in a risky activity, check your decision against the rules of thumb for underestimating a threat to make sure that you haven't unreasonably downplayed the level of risk involved. Risk versus benefit. Another bias in how we think about risk is in our perception of losses and gains. Put simply, all other things being equal, if we're faced with a certain small loss or a bigger but uncertain loss, we tend to take the chance on the latter, even though this might not be prudent. However, when it comes to a gain, we prefer a guaranteed small gain over the chance of a possible bigger one. The reasoning behind these apparently illogical biases probably arises from two common habits of thought: the optimism bias makes us believe that we're less likely to suffer loss than others. We also tend to place a higher value on rewards in the here and now than on those we might attain in the future, even if the latter are greater. Relative versus absolute risks. A further factor that can bias our perception of risks is the absence of any point on which to base comparisons. For example, imagine if a new drug were shown to triple the chance that you'd develop a certain medical disorder as a side effect. The medicine, you might conclude, presented a high risk to you and therefore was not worth taking. This is the risk as quoted in relative terms. However, the actual risk might be relatively low. If the chance of contracting the medical disorder were only 0.5% to begin with, and rose to 1.5% when you took the medication, this would indeed be a 300% increase of risk in relative terms, but in absolute terms, it would only amount to an extra 1% chance of contracting the disorder. Cumulative versus one-off risks. Judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Simón Bolívar, 1783 to 1830. As well as the relative or absolute level of risk, you also need to bear in mind the possible cumulative effect. Engaging in a low-risk activity regularly over a long time may pose a greater risk to you than engaging in a higher-risk activity once or just several times. For example, smoking cigarettes may, in the long term, be more hazardous than bungee jumping. In particular, pay more attention to activities that appear to be low risk if they are one-off occurrences but add up to a larger risk over time, and that fall into one or more of the categories of underestimated risks rules of thumb. Destiny or luck. Millennia of evolution have turned the human brain into a finely tuned pattern-spotting device. So important was this skill to our ancestors that they would rather risk seeing patterns where there weren't any than miss possible signs of danger. The life-saving, "those shadows might be a leopard" response. Today, however, this ingrained response may cause us to see patterns even where they don't exist. Our brains leap at every chance to discern patterns, to perceive order in chaos, and this introduces an often subconscious bias into the way in which we assess risks and benefits. One of the most striking examples of this behavior is in gambling, where people can wrongly interpret a succession of purely random events as evidence that they are having a lucky streak. This bias and how to avoid it when deciding on a course of action will be discussed next. When to flip a coin. Our view of risks and benefits is also influenced by our understanding or misunderstanding of chance. We have to be careful not to see a run of luck where none exists. But if we're finding it hard to make a simple either-or choice, then trusting to chance can be an effective course of action. True randomness. Pick a number between 1 and 10. Chances are you picked an odd number, and it's most likely to have been 7. Statistically, 7 is the most commonly chosen number. If people's choices were truly random, then an equal number would pick even numbers as pick odd numbers, and 1, 3, 5, and 9 would be as popular as 7. This simple test shows the inbuilt bias that can exist in our minds even when we make abstract choices that have little or no bearing on our welfare. When you need to make a clear-cut choice between two equally attractive alternatives, the best strategy is to flip a coin. Remember, the chance of whether a coin lands on heads or tails remains 50-50 every time, presuming that the coin has not been tampered with. Flipping a coin can also have a more subtle way of influencing your decision. Once you've flipped it, just before you look, you'll almost certainly feel a pang of hope that it has landed on one side rather than the other. That reaction, rather than how the coin actually falls, will tell you which outcome you truly prefer, and if necessary, you can then overrule the coin. The gambler's fallacy. When faced with a random risk, such as the risk of losing money in a game of chance, people tend, incorrectly, to see winning or losing streaks, or anticipate that their luck is about to change. This belief is known as the gambler's fallacy. Of course, in situations where the outcome might well depend on non-random factors, such as skill, reversals of fortune and winning and losing streaks may be meaningful concepts. But in any situation in which the risk is truly random, you must be careful not to fall for the gambler's fallacy. The Rule of 30. How do you work out whether some particular results you are getting are due to chance or to some other factor such as skill? Trying a particular course of action 30 times will give you a good indication. By having 30 goes at something you want to do, such as applying for a job or getting 30 informed opinions on an idea, you have a way of gauging whether your decision has potential. Repeated runs of good or bad results will help you to discount any element of chance. Dice Living. A surprise best-selling book in the 1970s, The Dice Man, by Luke Reinhardt, triggered a craze for dice living, in which people make key decisions on the basis of throwing dice. Its adherents claim it makes them feel more alive, as it introduces a greater element of the unpredictable into their existence, and often gives them an excuse to do things they always wanted without having to feel responsible for taking the decision. Group decision-making. Group decision-making combines the experience and intelligence of many people. This has its advantages and its drawbacks. The following information shows when it's appropriate to involve groups of people in decisions and how you can get the best from them. The benefits. Groups can often make better decisions than individuals. Indeed, intelligent behavior in nature doesn't always come from single creatures. Social insects, like ants, are individually simple-minded, but collectively display intelligent behavior by working as a group. Groups are less likely to miss out on information, as they have more eyes and ears than any one person, and individual errors at either extreme of their range of opinions tend to cancel each other out. This is particularly true for estimations of quantities or values. Market economies harness this power by effectively letting the consumers, rather than any central body, set the values of goods. A reasonable average. If you place a jar of jelly beans in front of a crowd and get each person to estimate, without knowing the other's guesses, how many jelly beans there are in the jar, the average of all the estimates typically turns out to be surprisingly accurate. The mistakes, the extremes in either direction, tend to cancel each other out. The Delphi technique. This method for making predictions was first developed in the 1950s and 1960s and has proved fairly successful. It works by combining the best of individual and group judgments. First, each participant in a group of experts fills out, anonymously, a questionnaire giving his or her predictions. The results of the whole group are then fed back into the individual experts, who can revise their predictions. The drawbacks. Deciding as a group removes or weakens the burden of responsibility from individuals. If you need responsibility to be taken for a task, try to assign it to one individual. For example, if you need emergency help in public, Rather than just giving a general cry for help, try to make eye contact with a specific passerby and address them directly. This lessening of responsibility can lead group members toward extreme opinions. Psychologists call this the risky shift. The tendency for moderate group members to assume that fellow members hold a more extreme view and adjust their own view in that direction. Conservative shifts are also possible. Watch out for group opinions that are far more risky or conservative than your own. Creative activities, such as designing a building or making a movie, can be performed well by groups, but there's a danger of design by committee, leading to a mishmash of dull compromises. It's best to have one person guiding the activity. For example, if your office needs a new interior design, you might get the staff to set the brief for the work and decide who has the best flair for design, and then leave the chosen person to make the creative decisions. Competition and game theory. Head-to-head competition with others uses up energy that you need for pursuing your goals. A more effective approach is to work out other people's likely actions and fit your response to them. This strategy has been studied in a branch of math called game theory. 3 aspects are given here. Where possible, seek to cooperate. Often competition results in an arms race, in which both sides are working as hard as possible just to keep up, yet neither ever gains an advantage over the other. Game theory predicts that wherever possible, it's best to cooperate and to form long-lasting, mutually beneficial relationships with those individuals and groups that are best at cooperating. However, if someone appears desperate to interact with you, question whether you're actually getting the worse end of the deal. The prisoner's dilemma. The police are holding a thief and his accomplice in separate cells. They offer one of them a deal. Confess and you'll go free. Don't confess, and if your accomplice confesses, he'll go free and you'll receive a 10-year prison sentence. If you both confess, you'll each get a 2-year sentence. Evidence is weak, and the prisoner knows that if he and his comrade both stay silent, they'll only receive a 6-month sentence. Here's how the prisoner can summarize his choices in a payoff matrix. My accomplice stays silent, I stay silent, we both serve 6 months. My accomplice stays silent, I confess, I go free, he serves 10 years. My accomplice confesses, I stay silent, I serve 10 years, he goes free. My accomplice confesses, I confess, we both serve 2 years. The ideal situation would be for both to stay silent. But if the prisoner can't trust his accomplice 100%, then by staying silent he risks a 10-year sentence. Therefore, his best option is to confess. This neatly illustrates how forming a cooperative allegiance is the best option. Find your dominant strategy. You're shopping at the last minute for a birthday present for your mother. Your sister is also out buying a present, and you're worried you might buy the same thing, but you're unable to contact her. So you must make a choice. The 2 choices are a specific perfume or a new skirt. If you and your sister both bought a skirt, your mother would be able to take one back for a refund. If you both chose the perfume, you know the shop wouldn't issue a refund. Therefore, no matter what your sister does, buying the skirt is your dominant strategy. It's your best course of action regardless of what she's doing. Eliminate the weakest strategies. In situations where there seems to be no clear dominant strategy for you to pursue, come at it from the opposite direction. Work out and eliminate what would be your weakest strategy, then your next weakest, and so on, until you arrive at the least weak strategy. Interlude. Lessons from the past. History shows many examples of tragic and bad decisions, some of which have led to huge losses of life. However, along the way, there have also been lesser blunders with a humorous side to them. Here are just a few, and the lessons we can learn from them. Missed opportunities. Steam power was known to the Romans, yet they never capitalized on its industrial potential. Instead, it was used as a novelty, with demonstrations of steam-powered door openers and steam-powered horn blowers. If they'd taken it more seriously, then the Industrial Revolution might have occurred almost 2 millennia earlier and given the Romans wealth beyond their dreams. Some have argued that the easy availability of slave labor at the time blinded the Romans to the potential for steam-powered machines. In 1667, the Dutch accepted a small spice island called Pulau Run from the British in exchange for Manhattan, an action which has been called the worst deal in history. Spices, in particular nutmeg, were extremely profitable luxuries at the time, and Pulau Run, as almost the world's sole source of nutmeg, must have seemed like a great acquisition. However, the Dutch failed to take 2 facts into consideration. A Dutch commander, in an act of sabotage, had already landed on the island and cut down all the nutmeg trees. And secondly, nutmeg turned out to be fairly easy to grow elsewhere. Still, even though the British gained Manhattan, they were only able to hold on to it for a little over a century. Lesson: bad decisions can result from not realizing the true value of what you have. False preparations. On the eve of the year 1000, many people in Europe believed that the end of the world was at hand. According to some accounts, they had spent the preceding months giving away their worldly possessions and engaging in self-mortification to prepare themselves for the afterlife. We may laugh now, but the lead-up to the year 2000 arguably saw a folly on a far greater scale: the Millennium Bug Panic. It was thought that computers' internal clocks would become confused once the years no longer began 19, and would cause the computers to crash. Many have said, admittedly with hindsight, that the fantastic sums of money spent by governments and large companies to prepare for the threat were unnecessary. They point to the fact that for others, including small businesses, schools, and even countries such as Italy, a lack of preparation had no harmful effect when the clock struck midnight on December 31st, 1999. Remember the Understanding Risk section on how we're more likely to fear threats that involve rare and dramatic factors, such as technological disasters. Lesson: panic and fear of the unknown can lead to a frenzy of unnecessary work that achieves little. Overlooking details. In 1962, the first ever interplanetary spacecraft, Mariner 1, failed 4 minutes after takeoff. Were it not for a replacement craft, Mariner 2, the incident could have put a premature end to NASA's interplanetary probe program. The critical failure in the $80 million craft was a single missing hyphen in the software controlling it. A similar but even more expensive mistake occurred years later in 1999 on the launch of a Milstar military satellite. The craft misfired soon after launch and was placed into an incorrect and useless orbit. The problem resulted from a misplaced decimal point in the rocket's software. This tiny error resulted in the failure of a mission which had cost over $1 billion. Lesson: if a small contribution or step towards a big goal is badly planned or omitted, it can jeopardize the whole outcome. Groupthink lunacy. When the tulip was introduced into Europe in the mid-16th century, it soon became popular. with members of the upper classes vying to own the rarest specimens. By the early 17th century, competition for them in the Netherlands reached such heights that bulbs were being traded on the stock exchanges and cost as much as the average Dutchman would earn in 7 years. When the bubble burst in 1637, many were said to have lost everything they had through their avid speculation. The burst bubble effect is particularly associated with a doomed venture almost a century later. The South Sea Company was granted a monopoly on trade with South America, and then later expanded its interests, taking on a large amount of government debt. The excitement of trade with the New World, combined with the security of a regular profit from government debt, drove investors into a frenzy. Shares in the company multiplied in value by 10 times in the course of just a year. Soon after, the stock price collapsed, ruining many people. The event became known as the South Sea Bubble. Sir Isaac Newton, who himself lost 20,000 pounds in the bubble, commented, "I can calculate the movement of the stars, but not the madness of men." Lesson: the majority can be wrong. 5. Handling stress and emotions. Many people assume that emotions are the opposite of the clear-headed rationality central to good decision-making. The truth, however, is that while our head and our heart can sometimes tug in different directions, mostly we use them both in concert whenever we make a decision. This chapter looks at how you can accentuate the best aspects of your emotional self and boost positive feelings to help you toward your goals. However, in some cases, making new choices can push you outside your comfort zone and into new ways of behaving, which can cause anxiety, so the chapter also offers guidance on ways to cope with stress and negative emotions, such as worry. Discover your true temperament. Temperament refers to those parts of your personality governing emotional responses. Understanding more about your own deep-seated reactions to situations can help you to make the most of your personal qualities and overcome any mental blocks in making decisions or taking action. Insight into your emotional traits. Your emotional responses are hardwired into you. They depend on the sensitivity of your nervous system and the degree to which your brain controls your reactions. The following assessment will give you an insight into your own responses. Rate each statement on a scale of 1, hardly at all, to 7, very true. Note your score on a piece of paper. To obtain the most accurate score, take the assessment on 3 separate days, and then average the results by adding up your scores for each day and dividing by 3. In addition, bear in mind that as an adult, your natural temperament can be obscured by other personality characteristics and by the demands of life and relationships. So try to imagine how you would have responded if you had taken the test when you were still a young child. Alternatively, ask 3 people who know you well to rate you, then average their results as before. Temperament Assessment. Questions for BE, Body Excitability. Rate the following statements. Sometimes I feel down or depressed for no good reason. I often worry about things I've said or done in the past and what impression these made on others. I'm easily irritated. My feelings are easily hurt. I regularly have very strong emotional reactions and find that my mood goes up and down during the space of a day. Questions for cortical inhibition, or CI. Rate the following statements. I enjoy socializing. People I've just met would say I'm a talkative person. People I've just met would generally say I'm quite a lively person. I'm able to let my hair down at a party. I thrive on meeting new people. Total up your scores for BE and separately for CI, and divide each by 5. Your scores show where you fall on 2 scales that psychologists call traits. The first is your body excitability, or BE score. The second is your cortical inhibition, or CI score. Your BE, body excitability score, shows how sensitive your sympathetic nervous system is. A high score means that you are easily emotionally moved, while a low score means you are harder to excite. Your CI, cortical inhibition score, refers to how strongly or weakly your cortex, the higher brain, inhibits your behavior. In essence, a high score means that you're extroverted and fairly uninhibited. A low score means that you're shy, controlled, and introverted. However, this score may depend to some extent on the situation you find yourself in. You might, for example, be quite outgoing among friends, but more reserved at work or among strangers. Traits and temperament. By combining your trait scores, you can see which of the 4 basic temperaments you have: sanguine, choleric, melancholic, or phlegmatic. A CI score of less than 4 coupled with a BE score higher than 4 would fall under melancholic. A CI score less than 4 and a BE score less than 4 would fall under phlegmatic. A CI score higher than 4 with a BE score higher than 4 would fall under choleric. And a CI score of above 4 with a BE score below 4 would fall under sanguine. The 4 temperaments. Here are the main characteristics of each temperament. Each one has its advantages and drawbacks. In order to make the best of your own temperament, follow the suggestions given here to accentuate the positive aspects and minimize any weak points. Sanguine. Your outgoing, optimistic, stable nature helps you to deal with most situations. However, you may rely too much on hunches and assumptions, and misdirect your efforts. Harness your energy by planning carefully and staying focused. Phlegmatic. Calm, observant, steady but reserved, you're great at seeing tasks through to the end, but may find it hard to assert yourself. Take note of the NLP techniques described later. You'll also tend to resist action and change, so also refer to the motivation advice coming up. Melancholic. Your naturally quiet exterior masks intense sensitivity. Enhance your mood and draw out your creativity with uplifting music and pleasant surroundings. You may need to control a tendency to worry or even panic. Choleric. You are lively, hot-headed, outgoing, and excitable. Your energy and ability to make quick decisions are great assets. However, you need to recognize when to think things through more carefully. To help control any outbursts of emotion, refer to the previous section on when not to decide. The history of temperament types. The idea of the 4 temperaments goes back more than 2,000 years to thinkers such as the historian Hippocrates, 460 to 370 BC, and the physician Galen, AD 131 to 200. While their theory about what caused each temperament was incorrect, they thought temperament was due to different amounts of bodily fluids, their descriptions of the temperament types, based on their observations of human nature, have turned out to be remarkably compatible with evidence from psychology and physiology. Emotional forecasting. Emotional reactions affect perception and judgment, not only in actual situations, but also when we try to recall how we felt in the past or predict how we're likely to feel in the future. The following tips should help you to recognize and compensate for some common forms of emotional bias. The overreaction bias. People commonly significantly overestimate how good or bad they'll feel in a particular situation. Researchers asked people to predict how they'd feel if their favored sports team won or lost a crucial match. The researchers rechecked their subjects' feelings just after the game, and then checked again several months later. They found that not only did the spectators overestimate how good or bad they'd feel about the results of the match, compared to how they reported feeling immediately after the game was over, but when asked again several months later, they once again overestimated the intensity of their feelings at the time. Emotional coloring. Another factor that can interfere with our ability to predict feelings accurately is that we're more likely to recall strong emotions than mild ones, even if the times of strong emotion were the exception. This means that if, even once, you felt very good or very bad in a particular situation, that one experience will color your expectations of similar situations in the future more than it should. Materialistic thinking. A surefire way to make yourself unhappy is to compare yourself with people who are richer, more intelligent, or more successful. Instead, follow the time-honored advice to count your blessings and remember those who are less fortunate than yourself. A materialistic view can also color how you gauge the importance of a goal or the rightness of a decision. Some people assume that owning the latest must-have item, such as a new car, will make them happier than it actually does. Even when people recognize this as a false expectation of happiness, they may still devote a lot of time and energy to attaining such items. Predicting feelings more accurately. Being aware of how recollections and expectations often play us false can help you to avoid falling into these traps. When considering any course of action, remember the following points. One bad experience shouldn't put you off trying again. Not all holidays, parties, or other good times will be as great as the best you ever had. Material goods are unlikely to make you as happy as you expect. If you're not sure how you'll cope in an unknown situation, ask someone actually in that situation how they do it. The role of self-esteem. Many people mistakenly equate self-esteem with self-love, but it has more to do with developing qualities that enable you to respect yourself. Self-esteem also involves taking responsibility for your life. It can give you the confidence you need to tackle challenges and reach your goals. The 6 tenets of self-esteem. The psychologist Nathaniel Branden was a pioneer of research on self-esteem. He identified 6 tenets of strong self-esteem, which you need to practice in everyday life. Living consciously. This means striving to be aware at all times, taking actions appropriate to a situation, and not denying reality. Self-acceptance. See your good and bad points just as they are. Even if there are some points that you want or need to change, start by accepting all of them as a fact. Self-responsibility. This involves taking charge of your own life. If you avoid such responsibility, you deny yourself a source of power. Self-assertiveness. Would you trust a friend who never stood up for you? If you treat yourself like this, you lose self-respect. Living purposefully. If you have ambitions or goals, and apply self-discipline to achieve them, you'll feel better about yourself. Personal integrity. Would you trust someone who breaks promises and tells lies? It can be tempting to do these things if you think no one else will know, but you're only betraying yourself. Building self-esteem. One way to enhance your self-esteem and help yourself to grow as a person is to try the following exercise, devised by Dr. Brandon. It's based on the idea that it's easier to make tiny 5% changes often than to try big 100% changes all at once. In this technique, you write down a sentence stem and complete the sentence with your own idea. For example, if I were to bring 5% more consciousness to my life, I would listen much more carefully to what people are saying. Create your own sentence stems for each of the tenets I mentioned. In each case, try to complete 10 sentences from one stem. Do it as quickly as you can to let ideas bubble up from the subconscious. Self-esteem boosters. Here are some more tips to help you increase your confidence, purpose, and sense of your own capabilities. Think of your favorite activity, and remember what it was like to try it for the first time. Remind yourself that it's only natural to feel unsure of yourself when you're stepping outside your comfort zone. List all the things you've learned or achieved in the past 10 years. Go and do something you're good at, no matter how small. Complete a small task that you've been putting off. Shift the focus off yourself and your flaws. Do something to occupy your mind and preferably get it into the peak state. Conquering worry. Everyone's plagued with worries at times. While you need to be cautious when making important decisions, worry is a misuse of the imagination, which can blight your perception and kill your confidence. However, it is possible to control worries to leave your mind free for effective action. Worry zapping strategies. When we worry, our minds tend to fixate on all sorts of dreadful outcomes, no matter how unlikely. A process that psychologists call awfulizing. Worrying also tends to be unproductive, as it causes us to become paralyzed by a problem rather than focusing on a solution. We can get caught up thinking the same thoughts over and over and dwelling on things that we don't have the power to change, such as decisions or actions we took in the past. The American theology professor Haddon W. Robinson once wrote, "What worries you masters you." If you find yourself suffering from excessive worrying, try some of these worry zappers. Break your worry down. Ask yourself, why am I worried? Try to come up with as clear an answer as possible. Next, ask, is it reasonable to be worried about this issue? Or, what do I find so particularly bad about this issue? Try to identify any sub-issues that you need to think about. Once you have identified these issues, it should be easier to tackle them. Nip worries in the bud. Worrying is often linked to procrastination. While in certain circumstances delaying making a decision can be a constructive strategy, letting a situation drag on can also allow worries to accumulate. Like weeds shooting up in a garden, worries are far easier to deal with if you tackle them as soon as they appear, and don't allow them to grow deep roots in your mind. Decide on an action. The more you put off making a decision or taking action, the more likely you are to fret endlessly about possible horrendous outcomes. If you're feeling paralyzed with worry, Try to take some initial step toward tackling your problem, even if it's only a tiny one. You should find it easier going once you've made a start. Mentally accept the worst. Make the best and most detailed plan you can think of for what you would do if the worst possible outcome occurred. Having prepared your worst-case scenario, tell yourself that there's no point in thinking about this issue any further. Distract yourself. Worries have the best opportunity to consume your thinking when you find yourself with a lot of time on your hands. If you often find yourself worrying more when you're bored, immediately distract yourself with another task, no matter what, to break your train of thought. Change your body language. Worrying can make you feel depressed. Counteract this low mood by adopting positive, confident body language. Stand tall. Unfold your arms to open your body. Raise your head and pull your shoulders back. The more confident your posture, the more confident you'll feel. Don't bottle up your worries. Simply telling someone else about your worries or writing them down for yourself can usually make you feel less concerned. Banishing self-doubt. Worrying about your own ability to achieve a goal or solve a problem can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you lose confidence and self-belief, you'll be less able to do what you need to do. Using the strategies for boosting self-esteem can help you to minimize or even banish worries of this kind. When not to decide. Always make sure you're feeling clear-headed and confident before making any major decision. Physical or emotional stress can result in mistakes. If you know you're currently not up to dealing with an issue, it's best to leave it and revisit it when you feel stronger. Avoid making decisions when feeling tired. Napoleon was reported to have said he'd never met an officer with 3 a.m. courage. Everything seems worse in the middle of the night, when your energy is at its lowest ebb. Try to get some sleep or a 10-minute daytime nap to refresh your mind. When feeling overly worried. First, deal with the emotions stirred up by worry. When feeling angry or upset, take time to cool off first. If you're talking to someone else and they get upset, suggest a brief timeout. When not clear-headed. Even a single alcoholic drink or dose of medication can impair your decision-making abilities. When feeling low. If you're feeling hopeless about a situation, check to see if hunger, illness, or stressful surroundings might be adding to your woes. Look after yourself and take action when you feel better. Tackling external problems. Worries of the external kind, which you feel have been imposed upon you, are often actually problems that need to be solved, and the worry stems from not being able to influence these external factors. Try the questions in Chapter 3 to help you get to the heart of the issue and for different ways to analyze problems. Following is some advice on achieving the right amount of mental stimulation between the extremes of panic and boredom that will provide you with the energy to tackle your worries. A state of balance. We perform at our best in a state called the zone of optimal mental achievement, when a task is finely balanced between being too easy or boring and too difficult or stressful. Psychologists call this state flow. A zone of optimal mental activity. When we're in the zone of optimal mental achievement or flow, we're able to work harder and longer, are more focused and enjoy the task more. Time flies by as we become absorbed by what we're doing. If you imagine a curved line or hill, with boredom at one extreme and panic at the other, the peak state is at the top of the curve or the hill. To track your own state, choose a regular task that you'd like to enjoy more or do better. Each time you've performed the task, sketch a copy of this curve and place an X at the point you felt you were at. If you felt bored or indifferent, your X will be to the left of the peak, closer to boredom. If you felt too stretched and stressed, it will be to the right, near panic. Repeat this step after several sessions, drawing a new graph each time so you're not influenced by your previous assessments. Evaluate your graphs. Where are your X's positioned most often? Too many in the boredom region? Ask yourself, if I were to be the best person in the world at performing this task, how would I do it? Aim to become excellent. Could someone else perform parts of the task that don't interest you so you can spend time on areas that do? Too many in the panic region? Practice helps. Most people are able to shift out of the panic region as they become more practiced and familiar with the activity or task. Ask for help. Can you get others to give you a helping hand? Many panic region responses arise simply because you're trying to take on too much by yourself. If you feel you're far into the panic region, ask yourself whether the task is too hard for you at your current level of skill. Do you need more training or qualifications? Is the task itself too risky? Deal with anxiety by deep breathing. Place one hand on your chest and the other on your abdomen. Take slow, deep breaths, pulling the air right down into your lungs as you inhale. You should feel your abdomen moving more than your chest. Reducing stress at work. Most modern workplaces are much safer than those of the past, yet these apparently benign environments are often contributing to chronic levels of stress. Here are some ways in which you can stay healthy and stress-free in the office. Stay hydrated. Dehydration can sap your stamina and concentration. When you're preoccupied with work, it can be easy to ignore thirst, which is an early sign of the problem. Modern offices can also contribute to dehydration. Often the air is dry, while the drinks typically on offer, tea, coffee, and sugared soda drinks, relieve thirst but actually end up flushing more liquid out of your body. The most hydrating drink to have is water. Try to drink 8 glasses of water a day. Take regular sips. Don't wait until you're thirsty. Create a negative ion atmosphere. Ions, electrically charged atoms, in the atmosphere can affect your mood. Positive ions can make you feel tense, tired, achy, and depressed, while negative ions can make you feel relaxed and happy. This is why offices often have an intangibly unpleasant feel. Electronics and synthetic fabrics create an excess of positive ions in the air. Negative ions proliferate around moving water, such as the sea, rain, or waterfalls. You don't need moving water in your office, however. Try placing an ionizer device, available from health shops, on your desk. Maximize your exposure to natural light. Scientific studies show that long-term exposure to artificial light can lead to physical and mental stress. Try using daylight-corrected bulbs, working near a window, and going outside whenever possible to expose yourself to natural light. Benefit from greenery. Research has found that views of grass and trees reduce headache, sore eyes, and aching muscles, and induce a feeling of being wakefully relaxed. Even if you're in a city, adding pictures of rural views, having plants on your desk, and taking walks in green spaces will give you these benefits. Energize through breathing. Many people claim the following exercise energizes and refreshes them. Sit comfortably with your back straight and hands in your lap. Breathe in deeply through your nose while counting to 8. Push out your stomach, then your chest to inflate your lungs fully. Hold the breath for 12 counts. Breathe out through your nose for 10 counts. Try to feel the air moving through the spot where your throat meets the nasal passage. Repeat the process 5 times. Practical NLP techniques. Taking action can mean casting off old beliefs and thinking in a new way. Until we become used to this, we will feel outside our comfort zone. One approach to rethinking how we see things is NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. The basics of NLP. Neuro-linguistic programming shows ways in which you can think more productively by changing the language of your thoughts, how you use words and create images and sensations in your imagination. Here are 3 of the most powerful practical techniques from NLP aimed at increasing flexibility in our thinking and perceptions. Produce positive feelings at will. The power of association can switch on a specific emotion. Imagine a situation when you felt at your most confident, happy, or decisive as vividly as you can. Make the feeling twice as intense, and then twice as intense again.
This is the end of the disc. The audiobook continues on the next disc.